This week I'm going to step away from Proverbs and we're going to go into Matthew 2. The reason why I picked this, I originally scheduled to preach this on the 9th, kind of in accordance with the Protestant church calendar, which celebrates Epiphany on the 6th. And Matthew 2 is about the wise men, and that's what Epiphany is celebrated for. And so that was one reason. And another reason is kind of connect what Pastor Mitch has been talking about in Genesis and show you how that theme is not just in Genesis, but goes through the entire Bible. And we'll pick it up only in Matthew 2. And so the theme and connection is the seed of the serpent versus the seed of the woman, the line of Cain versus the line of Seth. And we can boil this down to God's enemies versus God and His chosen. And so this connection goes through. We see it like another example being in Tim's Sunday school class. 1 Samuel 7, David and Goliath. Goliath is shown as to be God's enemy, and then David being faithful to God is shown as the one who combats him. And so that, with that theme in mind, we can now bring that into Matthew. And Matthew, just to give a quick understanding, Matthew is written for the Jews. He kind of shows us exactly how Jesus fulfills the Messiah prophecies. He starts this early in Matthew 1 by giving us the genealogy of Abraham through David to Jesus. And that kind of connects the ideas of kings and with Abraham through the line of David, who will be ultimately have a king which brings and restores the world. And so kind of with that, we'll start, we'll divide this up into 4 sections. Matthew 2, 1 through 8, and then Matthew 9 through 13, or 9 through 12, 13 through 18, and 19 through 23. So starting in Matthew 2:1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judah in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ is to be born. They told him, In Bethlehem of Judah, for so it was written by the prophets. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child. When you have found him, bring me word. I too can come and worship him. So verse 1 starts out with explaining to us what's going on. Matthew doesn't explain much of the narrative of the birth. He kind of just sums it down to Mary being talked to by the angel, Joseph being talked to the angel, and Jesus is born. Most information we know about him being in a manger comes from Luke. So this first verse in chapter 2 is very important to set the setting for the rest of the story. That Jesus is in Bethlehem, a mere 5 miles from Jerusalem, where Herod the king resides. And so this sets up now kind of where the battle is going to take place with this. We also need to notice that the wise men have come from the east, coming to worship the one who's born King of the Jews, which we know is to be Jesus. And kind of also that shadow back in Genesis about how Adam and Eve was kicked out and went to the east. Cain goes farther east. And the rest of the Old Testament then talks about the kingdoms from the east coming to Jerusalem to worship God. And being that we don't know much about the wise men, and more or less that they're probably Gentiles, this kind of shows a little bit of the fulfillment of that prophecy throughout the rest of the Old Testament. And so they come with a very clear agenda, that they have come to worship who has been born the King of the Jews. Now, the statement, has been born King of the Jews, is very important. It always shows that whoever the star is, whoever this is, at least to the wise men, that he's already king. He's on the throne. Which then kind of, when we get to the next part, shows the contrast between Herod, who is the actual king, who's on the throne. But he's not the king they're coming to worship, because he's old by this time. He probably doesn't have any children, since his reaction is that he was troubled by this news. And so it does kind of make sense that Herod is troubled, because these wise men come and they're looking for this king that's born, but it's not him. And so he now perceives this threat. Understanding that there must be something going on about the king of the Jews. Herod himself is only a half Jew. He brings the chief priests and scribes to the people, and they tell him through Micah 5:2, and kind of summarizing that whole section of Micah 5:1-6, into short little phrases about the ruler, the king, the true king of Israel, coming who will shepherd their people. Now we have to keep in mind that the original audience already knew who Herod was. And we'll see later on how brutal he actually was, where he goes and kills children in order to try to kill Jesus. But that's not the first time he acted onto people. He killed his wife and children because he thought they were going to kill him to take his throne. So he's going to do whatever it takes to keep his throne. And then so this sets a contrast now between a good king who's supposed to shepherd the people and to protect them and keep them, versus Herod, who is willing to go out and kill them. And so the wise men come, and Herod summons the wise men, and he tries to gather all this information, and he sends them out in a very deceiving way, saying, "Go search diligently for the child, and we have found him, bring word to me, that I may come and worship him." Most likely, the original readers would have understood that that's not something, but that wise men tend to do it. As we read later on, they have to be warned in a dream about it. So the wise men are now sent off, and starting back in verse 9, reading 9-12. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until they came rest over the people where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child and Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their gifts, they offered gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. One thing that is striking is how when they come to Jesus, how they act. When in Jerusalem, they're just kind of going around, as the text seems to say. They meet Herod, but there's not really any expression of what they did when they do it. But when they see Jesus, when the star comes over the house that Jesus is in, they rejoice exceedingly with great joy. They're just so excited to see the King of the Jews, the one who's born kings, the right king, the king that comes through David's line. And they fall down and they worship him. They give him what is due to him. And they probably don't know he's God, but they sure act like he's God, of some high figure. They give him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh, gifts that only kings would receive. These are very expensive gifts. And so we see now the battle set up. The bad king in Herod, the one who will kill and doesn't shepherd the flock, versus the king that God has brought, the true king, the one worthy of worship. But the story continues as Herod comes to realize that the wise men aren't coming back. Matthew continues the story in verse 13. Now when they departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." And when he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord has spoken by the prophets, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all the region who were 2 years old and under, according to the time they had ascertained from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because there is no more. We'll start later on in Herod's reaction. This reaction actually shows the true intent of his first statement. He wanted them to find him so he could go straight to the house, get rid of the child, and that's the end of it. And being that Matthew is trying to tell us that Jesus is the Messiah, that if that happens, and Jesus dies now, well, there is no cross, there is no forgiveness. Herod is trying to get rid of this threat to his throne. But it shows that Herod's heart's not true. Herod seeks to destroy what God has come to do. Being a half-Jew, he shows that he's not ready he doesn't want the Messiah to come. He's going to oppose the coming. And being Hellenistic, that probably would lead to bad positions on his part also. And so his reaction is radically different than the wise men. The wise men come and they worship and they give gifts to him where he seeks to kill and to destroy. And this just continues through how the Old Testament portrays the enemies of God. The Philistines is always seeking to try to take the land from the Jews, to destroy them. And yet, at the same time, what we read in the first part is God preserving Jesus. He warns, first he warns the wise men to go a different route, and now he warns Joseph to go to Egypt, to get out of the control of Herod. And he does it by night, most likely to flee from being seen. And so that to ensure the protection of Jesus. And God, preserving his son, chooses to then wait till Herod dies, showing that no matter what happens, no matter what the enemies of God try to do, whether they try to destroy Israel when they have the land, or when they try to destroy Jesus, God will preserve it until his plan is accomplished. And to finish out the story, Matthew 2, 19 through 23. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, "Rise, take up the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. For those who sought the child's life are dead." And he rose and took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judah in place of his father, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. Again, we see God preserving his child through this. Archelaus was one of 4 sons of Herod, and out of all 4 sons was the worst and most like his dad. And depending on how long Joseph is in Egypt at this time, might have caused Archelaus, who would have been old enough to know about this, to also enact his wrath against Jesus if he's found out that this was the son this was the child in which the wise men worshipped. And so this would cause great fear in Joseph. Obviously, if you've already fled for having the child killed once, going back into the same area where that's a possibility kind of shows his nature of man of being scared. But God, preserving him, sends him to Galilee, which is north, about 50 miles north of Jerusalem, out of his reign, in fact, into another brother's area, who would not have been as harsh. And so God continually preserving his plan, though amidst the battle between the seed and the serpent we've been studying. And so this is just one area. I mentioned Samuel 2. And I kind of want to exhort you to maybe, as you read through narratives, to maybe see how this continues to work out through the plan. It's not going to be everywhere. It's a theme that pops in and out throughout Scripture, but a theme that definitely helps us to better understand the fallenness of our own nature, but yet God still preserving his plan, still marching on to fulfill what he has deemed, that nothing would stop him to make sure that there is forgiveness for sinners so that we can worship him